Hi, and welcome to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm Dupe Witherick, alcohol free wellbeing and transformational coach, and the best selling author of A Cocktail of Clarity, How to Ditch Drinking, Embody a Joyful New Identity, and Thrive Alcohol Free. This podcast will show you that being alcohol free is not what the traditional narrative says. And even though alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it is okay to give yourself permission to stop drinking if you want to. And you do not have to wait until you hit rock bottom. It is certainly not boring, and I believe ditching drinking is just the start to living an extraordinary life. By getting rid of this one thing, it allows the doors to open to endless possibilities and opportunities. Each week, we will have guests on who are at various stages of the alcohol-free journey, from those who are curious to those who have been alcohol-free for years. We will also have experts on talking about different topics relating to alcohol and beyond. Through these conversations, you will discover what it means to thrive alcohol-free. Enjoy. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm so pleased you're here. I'm Dupe, your host, and it's wonderful to have you here. So today's episode, we are going to talk about anxiety and alcohol. And you may not be aware, but alcohol actually exacerbates anxiety, stress, and depression. And so we all think it helps us relax, it helps us de-stress, and actually it does the complete opposite. So I'll be talking to Michelle, and I will give you a bit of her bio in a moment, who shares about the reason she ditched drinking and has created her own alcohol-free drink is because of her anxiety. And it's a really interesting conversation, which I hope you're going to enjoy. But before we go there, I just wanted to mention that I will be hosting a masterclass on Thursday, the 23rd of May. And so in that masterclass, I'll be talking about how to take a break from alcohol even if you don't think you can. And so I will be giving you tips, and I'll also give you some tools that you can basically take away and maybe kickstart your journey. So if the masterclass is something you're interested in, as I said, it will be for an hour on the 23rd of May at 6 p.m. UK time. So if you're interested in that, then feel free to get in touch. You can email me at dw@thrivealcoholfree.com, or you can send me a DM via @thrivealcoholfree, and I will share the details with you. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing you on that masterclass. Okay, so as I mentioned, today I'll be speaking to Michelle Houston, and Michelle is the founder and visionary behind To Be Honest Bev Company, a company with the mission of changing the way we think about consumption by supporting the mental health of community members with alternative non-alcoholic options. And so we chat about her experience of stopping drinking due to anxiety, lack of motivation, and brain fog. And so it's a really interesting conversation and gives a different perspective to maybe one you've heard before. So I'm really excited that Michelle is on. So without further ado, here is the conversation with Michelle. So welcome, Michelle. Thank you so much for being on the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yay, it's really great that you're here. So maybe we start, if people don't know you or aren't aware of you, why don't you maybe give a bit of an intro, and then we can go into what brought you to become alcohol free.
Absolutely. So, my personal story is rather long-winded, but we won't go into all of that. I'm sure that'll be illuminated over the course of our discussion today. Really, where I actually started to stop drinking was when I was really suffering with anxiety and mental health. So, I was going through this period of my life that was challenging for lots of reasons. I mean, we all went through the pandemic, and that was, I think, challenging for all of us at different levels. And for me, prior to that, I had been in fitness and health, and I was health coaching and teaching and really engrossed in what it meant to live a well-rounded, healthy lifestyle. And through the pandemic, with the increase of drinking, with more sitting around, lots more TV watching than I like to or care to admit, it just kind of led me down this path that I wasn't very happy or satisfied with. So, close of the pandemic, we're out, we're getting back into things. And I had still continued my drinking habit that I felt like I had created throughout that time. And it wasn't even just like social settings or, at the end of the day with my husband, a glass of wine over dinner. It was sitting by myself at home watching a romantic comedy and finishing a bottle of rosé, and my husband would get home from work, and I'd feel incredibly guilty and shameful for the experience, and then experience in the days to follow lethargy, lack of motivation, struggles with my mental health in terms of focus and energy, and this sense of anxiety, this sense of stress in everything that I was doing. And as a business owner and an online business owner at the time, I just felt like one, I wasn't representing myself and showing up the way that I wanted to. And two, I couldn't keep working in this way. It just felt like I wasn't setting myself up for success. So I stopped drinking almost about 2 years ago at this point and didn't plan to stop drinking forever. That wasn't the intention. It wasn't like, I'm going to stop. I'm never going to have a drink again. It was more so, I'm going to put a pause on this. There were things happening in my personal life with my family that I also wanted to model a different lifestyle. And, addiction does run in my family. And so I wanted to demonstrate that I could take a step away from alcohol and that that would be okay. And so then it was a month and then a couple of months, and then just time continued to go and go and go. And now it's been again almost 2 years. And it makes me feel like I don't ever want to start drinking again. I don't really see the point of it. And now that I've had this much time away from alcohol, it's allowed me to really look at and analyze my experience with alcohol in the past. I started drinking when I was 14. And so the experience and course over my teen years and in my 20s, I didn't think that I really had a problem, but I look back now and I'm like, wow, there were a lot of times when I was binge drinking, blackout drunk, just not in a good place. And sometimes I get that almost visceral sense of that happening, or like the morning after, that hangover feeling. And I'm like, ugh, I just shudder and think, thank goodness that I don't have that in my life anymore. It's such a blessing. And who knows, maybe I will have a drink in the future. However, for me right now, this is the best thing that I could possibly choose.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love the fact that you said it's the best thing you can choose because obviously you had got to the point where it wasn't serving you from the sounds of it. It was causing anxiety, lethargy, just not lack of energy, lack of motivation. And I imagine it was exacerbating your anxiety. And as you say, the timing, having gone through COVID, there are lots of reports that say people ramped up their drinking in that time, especially women, actually. And there were a lot more cases of alcohol related illnesses, etc., because of it. So I'm interested. You mentioned that prior to COVID, you were in the health fitness uh, industry. You know were all about health and wellness. And
Hmm.
so how did COVID affect you then? Was it because the gyms were closed, or were you just not able to continue your routine, or what do you think changed during that time?
So I think that it had actually been leading up to COVID over time. I think that I had reached a point of burnout. Technically speaking, I'd been in the health industry and teaching, and I started teaching with a program called Monkey Bar Gym here based out of the US. And I live in San Luis Obispo, California. It's a very small town, but we had brought in this program. I worked at a martial arts gym. And so I was training there in Krav Maga and Muay Thai. And then I started teaching fitness there and was really engrossed in that. And then over time, it evolved. And then I got my bar certification. I started teaching bar fitness. And then I got my yoga certification. I started teaching yoga, then my NASM CPT. And so then I started personal training, running boot camps, and teaching in a functional fitness facility here locally. And I felt like that was my path. That was my career. That's what I was doing. That's what I was focused on. That's what I was good at. And so I was doing it a lot, anywhere from 16 to 24 classes a week, I was teaching in all different types and forms of movement throughout that time. and then had also started taking on health coaching clients and guiding them through healthy habit formation and what it meant to implement that sort of routine in their lifestyle. And I can't say exactly what it was, whether it was just the length of time that I had been doing it or a change of interest and passion. But as I was teaching pre pandemic, I started to fall out of passion, fall out of love for the fitness industry. And it just felt like I wasn't doing the right thing. So I started to get really burnt out with as much as I was showing up. I will also admit that I was teaching really early. So sometimes I was waking up at 4, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and then going to teach. And I think over that course of time, it really taxed my adrenals. It really taxed my hormones, and I felt depleted. So I was feeling fatigued. And so when the pandemic hit, it was almost a welcome relaxation, but what it threw me into is, okay, I'm not going to train as much as I was before, moving my body throughout the day. Even though I started teaching classes online, it's just not at the same level. You're not moving as much. I'm not teaching as much. It was all very limited. And then again, with the alcohol and with the food consumption, and then my family was really close by. So we spent a lot of time watching movies and TV. And that made things worse. So really what happened with that was kind of a mix of things. I think it's a physiological thing. Sometimes we have things in our body that are somewhat out of our control that we have to be able to identify and help heal from. Even just recently, so this is kind of a tangent, but recently I was actually diagnosed with what's called a pituitary adenoma. It's a benign tumor that sits on your pituitary gland. And so, looking back, there may have been an impact of this small tumor. Supposed to be a slow growing tumor, but it can be hormone producing and it can affect your pituitary gland, which can lead to anxiety, higher and elevated levels of testosterone, increased levels of prolactin, which can affect your fertility. And so there's this whole host of things that have been happening, I feel like, in my body for a long time that perhaps contributed. I'm not 100% sure how it all really fits in. And when I look back into that time, which is now what, 4 years ago, seems like just happened and it's forever. But with all of that, it really kind of impacted where I was mentally, physically, emotionally. And that kind of put me in that place. And I felt like I didn't want to work out. I felt like I didn't want to eat the right foods. I felt like I just wanted to sit around and watch TV. And coming from a person who was really motivated, who was really focused, who had always been involved with movement and health and fitness, it was really challenging for me to be in that place that felt like a total 180 or a total shift into that. So it could be a whole host of things. And it's hard to say sometimes exactly what that might have been, but it came out the way that it came out. And now I only just start to feel like I'm kind of back at it as much as I felt like I was.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And I wonder, you were doing a number of classes, it was constant use. It sounds like you did such a range of things, Muay Thai to yoga uh, to bar and all of that. I mean, that's loads. And then personal training and all of that as well. So I imagine it may have been linked to the anoma that you've got, but then it might also have just been fatigue because you've been doing it for so long and you maybe just got a little bit bored of it.
Hmm.
So would you say that that also added to the amount you started to drink because you felt a bit lost maybe from what you knew to something completely different?
Absolutely. I felt like I was no longer myself. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. I definitely felt lost. I felt like there was this big transition in my life. I thought I was headed in one direction. I had, again, all the certifications, all the training. I was really good at instruction. I loved connecting with my students. I loved building those relationships, loved talking about the body. And everything that I had done had been leading up to that place. And I thought that once I got this position at this one local facility that is like the top upper echelon of our local area when it comes to fitness and training, and I just wasn't as fulfilled as I thought that I was going to be. And this was all mixed into that time, but I had this sense of, well, what am I going to do now? What is my focus? Did I just waste all of this time and energy? I have all of these certifications and all this backing, and what am I going to do with it? How am I going to leverage it into that next chapter? And what am I doing with myself? And so, as a part of that, I really felt very apathetic. I felt disconnected, and I started to disassociate from my body and from my experience. And in so doing, I stopped really being in tune with what I needed, what I wanted on a physical, emotional, mental level. And so it became about distraction. It became about consuming television. It became about scrolling on social media. It became about looking at what everybody else was doing and paying attention to anything outside of my life, outside of myself that felt anything really. I didn't want to feel anything. I was very disassociated. I was definitely going through therapy at the time, and so had a lot of talk therapy with this experience of everything that I was dealing with and everything that had come up through that experience. But really, I just wanted to disassociate. I wanted to tune out, and alcohol was absolutely a huge part of that. It's a numbing tool. It allows you to just tune out. It
Yeah.
allows you to forget. It allows you to not feel. And so, really, what I was doing through that time is I was putting off anything that I had to deal with. And part of this, you ask how I was experiencing getting into this, why this kind of happened. Really, I think it's because I had suppressed so many emotions and so much grief and so many of my own personal experiences from childhood and leading up to that. Again, I started binge drinking at the age of 14. You don't do that if you don't have something else going on. It's not just like, oh, yeah, that just seems like a great idea. I'm going to traumatize my body, my emotional health. I'm going to make myself feel this way. No, 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 no. It happens usually because you've got something else that you're trying to mask. And so I think over the course of time, I had really suppressed a lot of these emotions and I wasn't dealing with them. I didn't want to sit with them. I didn't want to be in the grief. I didn't want to be in the sadness. I didn't want to be in the emotion of what I hadn't dealt with as I'd grown up and through my 20s. And so, with that, again, I was turning towards avoidance, turning towards disassociation, and turning towards numbing. And that's where alcohol, television, social media, and anything that I could possibly do to not be silent with myself, to not sit with myself, and to not be with myself and experience.
Yeah, and it's really powerful the way that you talk about it, because a lot of people probably don't actually appreciate that's what they're doing when they are drinking, that they are numbing out, that they are trying to escape from a feeling or from feelings that they have, or they want to create a feeling that they have. And I find it really interesting when you talked about getting to that point, which was the pinnacle of what you thought was the pinnacle, the best training center, you were there, and actually you felt empty and not fulfilled. And that's so common. A lot of us strive for these things that we think we want that are going to give us something, and we're depending on something outside ourselves, and we're looking at that end goal as something that is the pinnacle. That's what's going to make me happy. That's what's going to give me the good feelings that I want to create. That's what's going to give me whatever it is you're looking for. And none of that can do that for you. You need to be able to do that for yourself. And so it's actually finding all of that inside of you, because nothing external to you is going to give you that. And so I'm really pleased you brought that up, because I think it's a really common thing. There's so many people that are striving for things, that get frustrated, that then turn to alcohol to numb out if it doesn't quite work out. And then if it does work out and they get there and then realize actually it's not quite what I was expecting and it's not given me what I want, then again, they turn to alcohol to escape from that feeling and to escape from the disappointment that you must have felt when you got to that point. And so I think that's really helpful for the listener if that's something they're going through, because it's noticing it, isn't it? And then also thinking about what is your path. And so maybe when did you realize that actually it was becoming a point where you felt, I need to take that break?
It is such a cyclical pattern, really. And one of my mentors in the business space, he says that we're here in some way to learn lessons. Maybe that's not our dharma, our experience, but along our path, we are learning lessons. And what'll happen is that you'll get a small lesson, a pebble, and then if you don't learn it that first time, then you'll get a rock. And if you don't learn it then, you'll get a boulder or something bigger. And so I think that over the course of my life, I have had this certain sense of expectation, meeting expectations, not always other people's expectations, but even my own expectations. This is who I'm meant to be. This is how I should be. These are the things that I have to do. And I was putting all of that pressure on myself to be of a certain level, to be at a certain stature, to be a professional in this way, to show up like this, to be perfect in these ways and through these modalities. And so over the course of my life, I feel like I keep putting that pressure on myself, those expectations. And you're right, we do set the goal. And it is important to have a goal in order to set the trajectory and the path. But I think the true lesson that I've had to learn through this is really that the process and the journey is the point. Yes, have the goal.
Yeah.
Yes, have the level of success that you're looking for. Yes, have that desired destination, but realize that there's always going to be something after the destination, and that the destination is merely a point of stopping, resting, perhaps along your journey that is your life. You are here to experience that path, to experience that journey. And I realized that it wasn't about getting to a certain point, that it was more so about embracing the present, the moment, the now, each of the steps along the way that were really building me up toward whatever that goal, whatever that expectation might be or might look like. And so along that, I really had to learn that. I can't say I've learned it fully. I'm still working on that because we get so caught up in the day to day. We get so caught up in the expectation. We get so caught up in the should or have to of our lives. And when I really took a step back, a big step back, and maybe a few steps back and one step forward and a lot of steps back, I really started to recognize that my life, my presence, my being in the moment is the point. And it is the reason. And it is what I'm working toward and through and around and backwards. And so when I started to realize that there is no end point, there is no ultimate goal, I'm not constantly working forward, hustling forward, doing any of those things, that I'm working on embracing and being grateful for and accepting everything that is here and now and who I am and all of the emotions that come up along the way. Read a really great book that helped me through this process of 90 seconds to the life you love, and it's about moving through your emotions and feeling your emotions and taking that 90 seconds when an emotion starts to come up, whether that's anger or sadness or happiness or any of the above, is to feel your emotions, to move through the emotions and not let the emotions control you, but let them sometimes guide you and just allow you to embrace and practice that what is, and that's okay. So I think that this was really just a big lesson for me to identify and recognize that I can embrace the presence, I embrace the journey, and I embrace the here and now. And I can acknowledge and recognize all the ways in which I'm also responsible for that. And I'm in charge of that, not necessarily in control of, but in charge of. And so I get to make those decisions and guide that experience. So yeah, so that was a big part of that kind of like turning point for me to realize that like if I'm sacrificing now, if I'm avoiding in the now, if I'm detached from the now and using alcohol as a coping mechanism through this entire experience, what's the point? Like, what am I working toward? If I'm sacrificing my happiness, my satisfaction, my fulfillment, my joy in the present for some possible alternative future or goal that I'm working towards, why am I working towards that goal? So I really started to realize those larger lessons and those larger philosophies on life And I just found myself again drinking in times when it didn't necessarily fit the experience. Again, at home by myself unnecessarily. I was consuming a lot more than I should. I'm not a very big person. I'm like 5'6" and 120 pounds. Now I'm starting to work out more. So I'm more like 130 pounds with muscle. So, but really, realistically, like I shouldn't be having 5 drinks at a time. And so I found that I was at that place. And then there's another point that I'll just finish this thought with and then pass it back to you is that I got to a point in my life heavily involved in the alcohol industry, which I can share a little bit more about that story and how my husband is involved in the alcohol industry. And I looked up one day and realized that as I looked around at an alcohol based event, that there was no one's life there that I wanted. And that was a huge moment for me to recognize and realize, what am I doing? Like, why am I making these choices? Why am I spending this time here? Why am I investing this energy into something in which I don't want this to be my future? I don't want this to be even my present or my life with where I am and what I'm working toward. So yeah, so that was all a big kind of wake up and realization moment for me.
Wow, that's a lot, Michelle. And it's really great to have that self-awareness as well, because you have obviously got to the point where you are self-aware. And I do think when it comes to emotions, it's so easy to numb out. It's so easy to not sit in those emotions. So that book that you recommended, I think, will be helpful for people that struggle with that, because but I do find that one of the things of being alcohol free is you're forced to sit with those emotions because you haven't got that let me reach and numb out. And I think the thing about numbing out is a lot of people think that they're numbing out all the negative emotions, but what they're also doing is numbing out the positive emotions. And
Mhm.
so your story, it sounds a little bit like you had that realization that you didn't want anything to do with the alcohol world, that you saw people around you who you just didn't want to be like, and you drew your own conclusions, and fundamentally you weren't happy, you weren't living the life that you wanted to live. And so you talked about being perfect and really feeling like you need to show up in a certain way, and you've said obviously you're not quite there, but I'd love to hear some of the tools or some of the things that you've done other than obviously stopping drinking, and maybe that was the catalyst of it all. But I'd love to hear how you've got to the point where, one, you can sit in your emotions, two, you've let go and you're thinking, actually, I'm not in a race to get to an end point. I'm actually enjoying the present moment. And I think that's what a lot of people miss as well. And I'm running my second marathon in April. And everyone sees it as the day of the marathon, but it's not. It's the process, it's the journey. The actual day is going to depend on all the training that I've done and how I've got through that, and what I've learned along the way, and how I've built my strength and my running skills, speed running versus easy running versus long runs, etc. The actual day, the end goal, you get the medal. I did it last year, and I remember getting the medal and thinking, but that's it, because I've had 18 weeks of training and that had been my life. And so you get to the end goal, and as amazing as it was, and it was a fantastic feeling, but you do have this sense of you have a little lull where you're like, oh my goodness, I've done all of this, and that now what? And so I'd love to hear your perspective on, and maybe a couple of things that you've done along the way that have helped you be present and enjoy the journey more.
Yeah, Dupe, honestly, that is such the story of our lives, isn't it? It's all the prep leading up to it and the thing, and then it's this crescendo and this climax, and you think it's going to be all of this fanfare, and really it's like, oh, okay, what now? What next?
Yeah.
And so I will start with saying that because I came from the health and wellness space, when I was in this, what I call my rut or my stuck place, I had so much shame and guilt around it. So much embarrassment about the fact that I came from knowing everything in terms of, not everything, obviously, but knowing as much as I could know about nutrition and what to eat, knowing about hormone balancing and having that be a good thing, and balancing my gut, and thinking about my exercise and getting enough sleep and stress management. It's like if you looked at all of the lifestyle components, I was like, check, 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 check. I knew all of those things. And yet here I was in this place of anxiety, low level depression, really feeling like, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me so that I cannot do the things that I know that I'm supposed to do and should be doing, but somehow it's just not happening. And so there was so much shame, guilt, and embarrassment around it. And I will say that in retrospect and looking at that, that's actually some of the reason why it took me so long to learn. And this is what I definitely work with when I work with clients, and I work with, when I was working with my health coaching clients, is that the more that we berate ourselves, the more that we are hard on ourselves, the more that we chastise, the longer it'll actually take us to get to where we want to go. And that's shown in terms of negative and positive reinforcement. That's negative reinforcement, right? Punishment. You can do better. That's not good enough. When you think of a yelling commander, people who are really aggressive and intense about those things, all that negative self-talk that goes around in your head, that is going to actually take you longer to change, to evolve, to grow than a more positive reinforcement tone, as well as a nurturing tone. So as soon as I started to actually accept myself with all of the stuff, all of the things that I would deem bad or negative or not so great, that's when I was actually able to start making change. Once you fully accept yourself, this comes from behavior change and psychology. Once you're able to accept yourself, and once you're actually able to accept others and that person feels accepted as they are, you open up the doorway for change. You open up the doorway to make different choices in your life, because you're no longer feeding into that negative narrative of, I can't believe, you should be doing better. You're not good enough. This isn't working. You should be ashamed. You should feel guilty. You should be embarrassed about everything that you're doing. Because when you're stuck in that spiral and in that headspace, you're not thinking about the positive things that you can do, the way in which you can appreciate and embody who you are, who you want to be. And so once I made that shift, and again, it's not a black and white situation. It's not a flip a switch and then now you're good and everything's peachy keen. It's still a battle, and it's still something that you have to practice over time. But I will say confidently that it starts to get quieter, right? That negative self-talk, that language, it starts to tone down. And so some of the more tangible practices that I followed in order to get me to this place is lots of meditation, but not necessarily always sitting silently for 30 minutes or an hour, however long. I'm still working on that. That is still challenging for me. I've studied transcendental meditation. I know the practices. I've studied other types of meditation and things like that in my yoga teacher training. And when I was in that phase of my life, that's still really hard for me. So I use tools that do more guided meditations, that offer positive affirmations and ways of thinking. I really believe that there needs to be something that shifts in the subconscious mind, because we're running around having that conscious self-talk narrative, everything that we're doing through the day, what's happening, we're going this way, we're doing that thing. But there's really something in the subconscious that has to shift. So I started exploring that, and that took on a few different modalities, some of which include hypnotherapy, some of which just include subconscious reprogramming via like listening to certain wavelengths, or again, affirmations at a low level or during my sleep, and really starting to catch myself. So the self-awareness that you mentioned is so, so important. When I started to have that conversation with myself, all the negative self-talk, why can't you do this? You should be able to do this, all of those things, I would catch it and I would start to try to shift it. And I would give myself the grace, and I would allow myself to say, this is a time of rest. It's okay that you're not doing anything right now. It's okay that you want to take a bath instead of working. It's okay that you're not going to do a really intense HIIT workout at this time. Maybe you just need to lie on the floor for a little while. And so I really started to just honor myself, honor my body, and honor where I was. I really started practicing gratitude for my environment, just like in the morning and at night. Thank you for this roof over my head. Thank you for this warm bed. Thank you for my dogs. Thank you to my husband. Thank you to my sister. Thank you to my niece. And whatever it was, thank you for running water. Thank you for clean water to drink. These little things in our lives, we forget that we have so much to be incredibly grateful for. And so that, along with a lot of other work and a lot of other things that I was doing, really started to impact me. I also started really paying attention to what I was consuming because so much of our life is consumption, whether that is podcasts, news, social media, email marketing, television, movies. All of these sources of entertainment are bombarding us constantly with information, some positive, some negative, some neutral. And so we need to decide and determine, what does that consumption look like? And how are we being conscious about what we're allowing into our space, into our mental ways of being, into our lives? Because essentially it's building up, it's co-creating our experience, our existence, and our perspective on the world. And so as I became more conscious of those things, I really started limiting. I started unsubscribing from newsletters. I stopped following certain people in the online space. I started to not watch certain things. Aggressive war movies, I cannot handle. That puts me in a negative place. It affects my nervous system, it affects my emotional state, it affects my mental health. So I stopped watching them. So being really mindful of those things that we're bringing in, the people you're surrounding yourself with, being really intentional about who they are. What are they talking about? Are they constantly complaining? Are they consistently drinking? Is that their pastime and activity? If you're trying to change your life, you often need to change the people you spend it with. So I got really conscious about all of these areas of my life. I gave myself a lot of grace, and I started making these shifts and these changes to really change the narrative in my head first. And then it started to cascade into my external world and my environment and how I show up.
Yeah, and that's amazing and so important. I think people really underestimate what they're consuming and the impact it has. If you are listening to the news 24/7, well, you're going to have a pretty negative view of the world. You're going to think everyone's bad and that humanity isn't going to survive. But actually, if you choose not to do that and listen to more positive things, and as you say, I think social media can be hugely beneficial. But there are things on social media that are really negative that just don't help people. So making those conscious decisions. And to your point, it's so important who you surround yourself with. They say the 5 people you surround yourself with is who you end up becoming and who you are. And
Mhm.
so these are all things that people just don't necessarily take that step back and think about because that's what they've always done. And you talked about the subconscious reprogramming. And every day, that 95% of what we do is subconscious. And so you understand how people get stuck in a rut because they are getting up, going to work, drinking the same coffee in the morning at the same time, having the same lunch, speaking to the same people, but not actually realizing that that's potentially stopping them or holding them back or putting them in a sense of negative emotion that they're not aware of. So to really catch your thoughts, as you said, you noticed when you started feeling those negative emotions and you caught yourself and then you started to say different things to yourself and to be more compassionate and kind. And I think this is such a powerful lesson for people because lots of people just don't do it.
Well, it's easy. We are our belief systems. We are our habits. We are the unconscious behaviors that have been created from the moment we came out. Seriously, our lives are a testament to the experiences that we've had and that have come before this very moment.
Mm,
From the language that was said to us, to the environment that we lived in, to the circumstances that impressed upon us, to the people who raised us, to the
mm,
schooling that we had or didn't have.
mm,
All of those things have created these underlying subconscious belief systems and agreements that we've made with ourselves and with the world around us. And what
mm,
it does is it colors your perspective. And
mm,
so we're each walking around with our own biases, our own perspectives, our own lens and narrative in which we see the world.
mm,
And that's not a bad thing. It's
mm,
just something to be aware of. It's something that we need to acknowledge and that we need to also own and say, you know what? I've identified that I have this lens, that I have this narrative. What am I going to do to change that? How am
mm,
I going to begin to address this? How am I going
mm,
to start to shift it? Because
mm,
we each have that ability within ourselves. We each have that responsibility to the life that we want to create for ourselves. So if we're looking to make that change, if we are interested in doing something different, if we want to live in a different quote unquote reality than we have created for ourselves up until this point, we have to start acting differently. We have to start thinking differently. We have to start being
mm,
different.
mm,
And we each have the ability to do that and own that. And so I think once we recognize that and we own the fact that our circumstances are not just a product of what we have experienced up until this point, but the way in which we've engaged with those experiences,
mm,
then we can start to take on the responsibility 100% and say, okay, this is where I've gotten to at this point. It may have been because of X, Y, and Z, but what am I going to do about it? I'm an adult. I'm a human being that has the choice and the ability to make that change.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And it is all about having the choice. But I think a lot of people feel they need someone to give them permission to make that choice. And I wonder, what's your perspective on that?
So if you're waiting for permission, I grant you permission in this very moment to start to take responsibility for your life and that you can choose, be, do, and have anything you want.
Mm,
So if you're waiting for permission, there it is. And then my perspective on that is we're constantly looking externally to us for validation. And we're going to look for permission. Is it okay if I'm here? Can I launch this business? What can I be posting this on social media? Is it okay? Is the language that I'm using okay? How do I look? Does my outfit look okay? We're constantly looking outside ourselves for validation. And really, ultimately, we need to change that. We need to shift the way in which we seek that validation. And we need to know that we're the only ones who can grant that. I am the only person that it matters to how I look, how I show up, all of these things that I'm doing with my life, whether that's a choice in work or career or business, or how I spend my time, or what I do with my dogs, or how I say something on this podcast. That's for me to decide. And I think once we can start to tune out the haters, for lack of a better word, but tune out that experience of judgment and stop worrying about what other people think or looking for permission, because I totally agree. I think that I, for a long time, was looking for permission. I still think about that in my business. I'm looking for permission. Should I go this direction? What if I do this thing? Does that look okay? What will people think if I just launch this product? And I think once you start to quiet that down and again look internally and say, how do I feel about that? What's my judgment about this experience? Am I being the person that I want to be in my life because I have this certain value set or these ethics or this way in which I intend to show up in the world? And I feel good about the person that I'm being? That's the permission. That's the validation. That's what we all need to tune into as opposed to looking external for that permission. But I also give you permission.
brilliant. Yeah, agreed. Fantastic. So what's happened since? So have you moved away from the health and fitness area? Tell us what's happened since.
So I'd like to think that health and wellness and well-being will always be a part of my story and it's ever evolving for me. And I want to continue to impart how important it is because when I started health coaching, the reason that I did was because I believe that when we each allow ourselves to really care for ourselves, really nurture our own mental, emotional, physical, financial, spiritual, everything else on the spectrum, when we cultivate those things, we're able to then show up. much better. We can be involved in volunteer and philanthropic organizations. We show up better in our businesses, offering better customer service, better guidance, better coaching, better products, better service. And we show up with others in our relationships in a much more positive and healthy manner. So I really think that it all starts with us and having the self awareness to be able to shift these things, to make these choices, to change your behavior, to change your attitude, your perspective, and what you do to then radiate out into the world. And I genuinely think that if we each individually do that, the world will be a much better place because when we're individually fulfilled, when we're individually cared for, the world is improved. So I like to think that. But over the course of this time, so my husband has been in alcohol production for 10 years, which I know is kind of ironic considering I'm now alcohol free, but I think that this is an important part of the story. And so he has actually been doing beverage manufacturing for the past 10 years. So, beer, mead, and cider predominantly. He's also dabbled in distilled spirits. And so, when I stopped drinking, we started talking about non alcoholic options. What does that look like for him? And of course, he's paying attention to the Nielsen data, the sober curious movement that's happening, and how consumers are making different choices. And that's the other thing I think that I'll just put in a side note here is that oftentimes we think we're alone in this. All of my friends are drinking. So if I want to stop drinking, what does that mean? We'll recognize that there's actually a really large community of people who are shifting away from alcohol. So you are 100% not alone. If anything, actually 50% of adults choose not to drink on a consistent basis. So you're not alone in that. And you can always find a community and a group of people who are changing and shifting alongside you, which I think is really powerful. And we as human beings feel like we want to fit in different places. So in any case, so with that transition, we started talking about non-alcoholic options. And I have a business background, marketing and sales. And we just started going through tasting things, trying things out. What are we going to do with this? I don't know. What's it going to look like? And so we first went down the route of a CBD canned product. And that was the first direction that we went. But talked to some people, looked at the numbers. That's not really going to make sense. And so over the course of 6 months or so, we actually came to and decided upon a non alcoholic hemp infused spirit. So, more craftsman style, boutique, luxurious, giving people the experience of a craft beverage without the effects of alcohol and without any mental impairment. So, that hemp infusion really gives people what some would say is that stress relief, that easing of tension, kind of what you're looking for a lot of times in a beverage. You're like, just the end of the day, I just want to drink. So giving that feeling and that sense without, again, affecting the mind, without impeding your mental health in any way. Again, my background with anxiety and low level depression, I didn't want to feed into that. So, what can we create that doesn't feed into those things? Zero sugar, because everything that when I went out to drink a mocktail, it was just sugar or juice in a glass. And it just felt like I was an afterthought in that regard. So we wanted to create something which became, to be honest, Beverage Company. So our hemp infused non-alcoholic spirit line, we've launched with a gin inspired option called Focus. And so it's very botanical, very herbaceous, and it has the texture and quality of a spirit that blends very nicely in a craft cocktail. So that when you're drinking it, you feel like you're having an adult beverage. You feel like you're having an experience. You're a part of things. You've got that end of day ritual. It feels really satisfying, again, without the effects of alcohol. And so, what we found in the consumer space, everyone goes in a different direction. And there are some things out there, especially in the non alcoholic spirits lines, that are maybe watery or they don't really hold up in a drink and craft cocktail. So we just went with it. And now, a couple years later, here we are, fully launched and distributing. We have restaurant partners. We're direct to consumer online with e-commerce. And it's been such an evolution and a journey. And I think a really big part of that is actually connecting with other non-alcoholic folks in the space who are doing really wonderful things in the sober and sober curious movement and seeing what's available to people in terms of alternatives and that exciting opportunity to do something different than drink alcohol.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so did that come to you pretty much as soon as you stopped drinking? Or was it afterwards into the journey that you had that aha moment?
I think into the journey. So my husband, I will say, Jeremy, he has wanted to do a non-alcoholic option because he's again been watching the data and seeing this movement toward non-alcoholic options. And he wanted to actually do something that was more of a hangover cure or the night of drinking or the day after because he produces alcohol. So it's like, oh, it'll go great with alcohol consumption. So that was where the idea started. And I didn't have any intention of launching or having a physical product business. Have been in the online space for 5, 6 years. I really only wanted to create digital products, programs, coaching. And it just like little by little started happening. And then we utilized a local service for women-owned business owners to kind of go through this process of launching. We did that, applied for a grant, got a $5,000 grant to get started. It's a very bootstrapped company. We're very small. We're not like Big Alc throwing money into a non-alcoholic option. We're small, handcrafted, very small batch, direct to you, very intimate. And yes, we have big plans to grow, but that's how we've started. And I would say it took some time. I didn't stop and say, this is my new path. And again, because I stopped drinking at a time when I didn't plan on stopping forever. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to stop drinking. This is just my decision. It was like, no, I want to stop drinking. And then it just continued and continued and continued. And with that, I became a lot more vocal, a lot more opinionated, and honestly, a lot more passionate about choosing not to drink and having more of a sober, curious lifestyle. Because I think for me, it was really not if I drink. When I went through my teen years and into my 20s, it was when are you going to start to drink? And it's such a rite of passage and it's such a part of our culture and it's very glamorized and it's heavily marketed and it's such a part of everything that we do, celebrations, events, birthdays, graduations, going out at night, happy hour, events with your coworkers or networking opportunities. It's all so much a part of our culture. And so as I've gotten away from it, it's made me realize that one, we do need better options. And two, we need to spread this more and that people who are even drinking and just want to take a break from drinking, it's okay. And it's a really good thing to do for your health, for your mental clarity, for your enjoyment and fulfillment in life and everything else. So it's just made me feel like spreading the message more so and doing that through a non-alcoholic brand.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And so where can people find that and find you if they wanted to try it?
Yeah, so you can follow us on Instagram at To Be Honest Bev, and that's TOBEHONESTBEV. So To Be Honest Bev. Same thing for the website, tobehonestbev.com. And you can always reach out to me via email if you have any questions or you're interested in learning more. And that's friend at tobehonestbev.com. So friend, FRIEND at tobehonestbev.com.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? When you take that break from drinking, it's amazing what opens up. And I'm sure you didn't see this 2 years ago, and look at where you are now. And I think what the common thing everyone has is when they do stop drinking and they've gone 6 months, 9 months, maybe a year, it's then all about how do I share this with others? How do I get the message out? How do I encourage others to maybe follow suit and take a break and see that actually it's not what people perceive it to be and what its society has led us to believe about being alcohol free. It's a very different experience. So well done you for changing the world in that way. Fantastic.
Thanks, Dupe. Thank you for having me on. And I have to agree. I think the further I get away from alcohol, the happier and more intentional, more mental clarity, more vibrance. That was really the mission and intention and vision behind To Be Honest Bev as well, is that we really want people to be honest with themselves. We want people to embrace a more conscious way of living. And that takes taking time away from alcohol, whether that's a month, a week, a year, forever. It can be anything on the spectrum, but really ultimately it allows ourselves to tune in, to tap in, to be more present with who we are and how we're showing up in the world, what we're meant to be doing. And the further I get away from alcohol, I swear it just blows my mind how much time I wasted on it, how
Mm,
much time I spent doing that with my life
Mm,
and realized that it didn't open up any doors or opportunities for
mm,
myself. And so it's just been such an evolution, such a journey, and such a place for personal growth that I never anticipated and am fully embracing now, and just want everyone to have that sense of joy in their
mm.
lives.
Yeah, fantastic. As you know, we always end our episodes with the one question, so I'd love to hear your perspective. So, what does thriving alcohol free mean to you, Michelle?
I think to pay that focus of thriving is such an important part of that question. And we have the ability on a day to day basis to choose. We have choices in front of us every single day. Alcohol is just one of so many. But I think that when you do choose to be alcohol free, it allows this cascade effect in your life of whether that's fitness or improved sleep or choices in nutrition or ways of spending your time or a business that you've been thinking about launching. Whatever it is, it allows us to experience this sense of fulfillment, presence, joy, and that sense of thriving in all of these other areas. So, being alcohol free for myself has really opened up the door to be more in touch with reality, like truly, because we talked about this at the beginning, but that numbing sensation that comes with alcohol really impedes your experience in life. It not only takes away from the evening in which you've experienced, but then the days to follow, and creating that brain fog and that lethargy and that lack of mental clarity and that inability to focus. It really does affect so much that we don't realize. And I don't even have the expert background on the physiology of what's happening in terms of your brain and your liver and your kidneys and your stomach and your heart and literally every organ that is impacted, which I just neglected. Coming from health and wellness, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do all the right things for health and wellness, but then I'm going to put all of this toxic liquid into my body. Okay, that doesn't make
Yeah,
any sense.
yeah.
But really, it means to me to thrive alcohol free looks like letting that ability to thrive into all of these other areas of my life. It allows it to be that cascade. It allows it to be that ripple effect. It allows me to be more present, more vibrant, more aware, more conscious in everything that I'm doing. And that's how I want to show up. And I will admit, sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes it is emotional. Sometimes I cry. Sometimes I'm sad. Sometimes I'm angry. Sometimes I'm frustrated. Sometimes I still feel guilt and shame for other things that I'm doing. It doesn't mean that it completely wipes all of those things out of your life. And now, again, everything is peachy keen and unicorns and rainbows. But it does mean that now I get to have the experience of being a human and having my emotions and being okay with that and living through them and not feeling like I have to avoid, detach, or numb from my experience. Because what a beautiful thing to get to experience all of these human things in our lives.
Oh, that's such a great answer. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I fundamentally agree. Yeah, that's the whole purpose for me. Thrive Alcohol Free is all about how can you thrive in all areas of your life just by ditching this one thing. And that's the purpose of the company. That's the purpose of Thrive. So thank you for reiterating that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we end, any final words of wisdom? Any other thoughts that you want to share?
Well, I just want to say thank you for doing what you're doing, Dupay. I think that it's really hard sometimes to go against the grain. And having been in my industry and not believing in weight loss and a lot of the things that I feel like are counterculture, it can be challenging, and it can be challenging to have an opinion about it, and it can be challenging to take a stand and speak up about what you believe in.
Mm.
So I just want to commend you for
Yes.
taking this step and for doing this work, because it is not well appreciated all the time and it does go unnoticed. And like you said about the marathon, there's so many things that we do behind the scenes. There's so many things that we have to work on in ourselves. It's like the iceberg metaphor, right? You see the
Mm.
iceberg at the top,
Yeah.
but everything that's actually underneath the water, most
Mm.
people don't recognize or acknowledge.
Mm.
And so I think that the sober curious movement is growing. I think that we have very good evidence against alcohol, and that we have alternatives out there that are now providing opportunities to do something different, to be a different way. And I think that the conversation and the narrative on this is so important to continue and so important to share. So I just want to thank you for providing a platform, for doing the work that you're doing with individuals, and for bringing this conversation to the forefront, because I do want to change our culture. I want the discussion to not be when you start drinking, but if you drink at all. I
Yeah.
mean, alcohol is not going away. That's okay. But it should be an active choice. It should not be a rite of passage or a have to in our evolution and in our growth
Mm.
as we get older. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for being just a wonderful guest and sharing. I mean, so much. There was so much wisdom there, and just wonderful things that I'm sure the listener will take away. And you've given people a different perspective, and again, given them permission, which is fantastic. So I hope someone listening takes that and goes with it, and let's not be afraid. Let's not worry about what others think. Let's not worry about the judgment. Do what is right in your guts. So thank you for sharing so generously. And yeah, we'll see each other soon, I'm sure. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dupe.
Take care. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. That was a really interesting conversation, and I hope you found it useful listening and it maybe gave you a different perspective when it comes to alcohol. So I do hope you have a wonderful week, and let me know if you've got any questions or if you need any guidance in any way, or if you are looking to hear something else on the podcast or would like to hear some specific people on the podcast, then let me know and I'll do my best to accommodate. Okay, well, I hope you have the most wonderful week and I will see you on the next episode. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe so you get alerted every time I drop a new episode. I'd love it if you could rate, review, and share this episode. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free and follow me for daily tips. If you would like to work with me, I offer one-to-one coaching sessions and have my signature Thrive Alcohol Free Society group coaching program. If you're not yet ready for coaching, I also have a self-paced online course, which is a companion to my book, A Cocktail of Clarity. All the links are in the show notes. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful week. Take care.